Hello bakers, happy Friday. It's Friday, the last Friday in August, and that means it's Forum Friday today. This is where Dr. Lynn and I get together and talk about some of the postings in our various forums and share with you some of our thoughts and ideas. Dr. Lynn is taking a much needed pause with family before the kiddos go back to school. Always make family your priority. That's always important. And so I'm here flying solo to give you the rundown on some of the things that have been happening in our forums. Please remember that you can join us, and we encourage you to please join us in the conversation, either at bakerpedia.com in the forums, or where we have the most activity happening these days is probably best and easiest is at Facebook. Search for Baking Industry Professionals and you can join that group quite easily. Or on LinkedIn, same thing, Baking Industry Professionals. Right? So we have two posts I want to talk about from the Bakerpedia forum. One is from Edel. Edel is a food scientist in Singapore working on some bakery items. And Edel is asking about the difference between ascorbic acid and encapsulated ascorbic acid and what it does in a bread dough. So first of all, you can read all about ascorbic acid on Bakerpedia under ingredients. Just select ascorbic acid and you'll see tons of information there, including the Good Manufacturing Practices limit of 200 parts per million on the total food product. Now that's way more than we would ever use in baking. Typically in baking, what you will see is 30 to 60 parts per million on the flour. In some cases up to 90, but it's been, I have never seen it above 90 myself, right? So it's really extremely rare. Encapsulating means that you are enclosing that with for example, what's most commonly done is a high melt fat layer. So a fat that melts above 110 degrees Fahrenheit so that it won't melt in mixing or proofing, and it will melt later in the oven. This could be, for example, if you're doing a high dose of ascorbic acid to create an antimicrobial or an anti-mold type of shelf life helper, so that it by dropping the pH in the product. You want to be careful not to go too high, as the product will taste kind of sour and bitter if you get too high of a level. But you can do it that way to drop the pH so that the encapsulation melts in the oven as the yeast is beginning to die, so that high level is not going to cause blistering and things like that, and it is being evenly distributed throughout the dough, and so then it makes the bread lower in pH and therefore it less susceptible to mold growth. Generally, ascorbic acid is added as a oxidizing agent. It helps to strengthen the dough. It reacts with some of the gluten proteins, and it helps to feed the yeast. It makes the yeast bubble a little bit faster. So you will see differences there. Those are the main things at that point. Another conversation we have is from our longtime member and contributor, Isams. And Isams is an entrepreneur in the New York area who has been making a very unique type of what he sort of referred to as a vegetarian pizza. It's sort of somewhere between a focaccia, a pizza, and a Mediterranean flatbread. It's really sounds super interesting. And he's having success with this as he's growing, and he's going through some growing pains. So Isams has got several questions about freezing and shelf life, and I did my best to try and answer them all on the forum, where you can read in detail the answers. But briefly to talk about some of this is the one thing I want to capture, probably most importantly, that gets overlooked a lot, is freezing. So if you don't have a blast freezer, how do you freeze? Well, and even with a blast freezer for that matter, right? Because a blast freezer, again, is you're still dealing with a chamber, right? And so the important thing is to freeze the pieces, relatively speaking, individually, right? So in other words, once the pizza has been shrink wrapped or vacuum packed, that in a larger operation, it will go through a freezing tunnel. That may be either just an extremely cold blast freezing tunnel, or it might be a liquid nitrogen tunnel where liquid nitrogen is poured over it to freeze it. Some bakeries are also using CO2 these days as well, and as a means of freezing very quickly. And so that is one way to do it. But if you don't have that available to you, and you're using a walk-in type freezer or a walk-in blast freezer, it's still important to freeze them individually. So once they've been shrink wrapped, make sure they're not stacked on top of each other, and putting them into your freezer on a speed rack or things like that, so that the air can move between it. Because the freezing is not a process of putting cold in. Freezing is the process of extracting the heat. So if the air can't flow around it, that heat extraction process is slowed down by every layer that it has to go through. All of these layers in the stacking acts as insulation. For example, on the extreme is if you were to shrink wrap and vacuum seal your pizzas, put the pizza into a cardboard box, put 12 of those cardboard boxes into a corrugated cardboard case, and now put 30 of those cardboard cases on a pallet and roll the whole pallet into the freezer. That might take a week until they freeze, because there are so many layers that it takes too long for the heat process to be able to move to the outside layer as the wind in the freezer takes the heat away. So the important thing there is to get everything frozen solid individually first, and then pack them into their boxes and master cases. And once they're packed that way in a master case, they keep frozen much longer, because again, you would have to get the heat going back in, which would then be, once it's compacted, it keeps each other insulated as far as the cold process goes. So very important to improve your shelf life is the freezing process has to be as quick as possible, so that you get the best results and a long-lasting shelf life. You freeze it quick like that, you can easily get 4 to 6 months out of good product still. It won't spoil after 6 months, but the quality will probably begin to deteriorate at that point. Vacuum sealing is also much preferred these days. It's become much more economical to vacuum seal when you can. I mean, not everything can, but something like a pizza probably could be very well vacuum sealed. I've seen them from a lot of the retail pizzas in the supermarket. They are often vacuum sealed. That pulls all the oxygen out, because the oxygen is what gives bacteria growth. It's what increases staling, all of those things, right? So that's on the freezing process. One other conversation we've had that's of interest in the Facebook forum at the Baking Industry Professionals is a gentleman who is making breadsticks, and he is now achieving commercial levels of sales and doesn't have mechanical equipment yet, and doesn't quite have the funds for that, and is looking for old-fashioned traditional tricks and ideas to speed up the process of making these breadsticks. So not sure exactly. I mean, I've in my day, the thing was most importantly fast hands, right? You got to be quick at it, right? That's one thing. The only other thing I could think of for him is if you were to place the dough pieces onto a tray, that like a baking sheet that is turned upside down, and take another baking sheet on top, and then kind of roll it, right, as if it was the compression plate on a sheeter molder, right? The same idea. Where on a sheeter molder, the belt is moving and the plate is stationary, and in this case, you would have the bottom tray stationary and the top one moving to try and roll them. That might be a good way of getting them rolled, or at least even getting them started. So we're looking for more ideas there to see what helps and what works best. And we get posts in Facebook, of course, as with the forum, from all over the world, right? So we encourage you to participate, and joining is easy. Just look up Baking Industry Professionals on Facebook, answer 2 simple questions, and the admins will let you in. And as I like to say, Bob's your uncle, right? So that's it for the Forum Friday today. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend. I know some of you on the East Coast are going to have to be looking out for Hurricane Ida. We keep our prayers and our thumbs crossed and fingers crossed and thumbs pressed that everything goes well there, and we don't have any big disturbances, or definitely don't have any lives lost. So all the best. Take care. I'm Mark Floerke for Bakerpedia. I'm a Bakerpedia influencer, and I'm the host of the Bacon Science Podcast. Bye for now.